Everyone to NAU Summer Seminar Series. My name is Dr. Paul Lenz. I'm a faculty member, as many of you know, in the Politics and International Affairs Department, and am the co-coordinator with Phil Lyons, one of our community members in Flagstaff. Tonight, we have the pleasure of Dr. Rick Szal, who is going to talk about the economic impacts of COVID-19 on business. And so just before I give the introduction, I just want to remind you that this series is not possible without your generous contributions. So we appreciate any contributions you might be able to make to help us meet our fundraising goals. We do appreciate them very much. And we will be posting links in the chat. My colleague Kristen will be posting those shortly for you to post, or online you can link to the contribution page where you can donate to the NAU Foundation and mention in the subject line fund number 5466. So tonight we are going to talk about the economic impacts. We talked about the political impacts last week. So Dr. Rick Szal received his PhD from Duke University in 1973. His fields of concentration include economic development, economic theory, labor economics, and population studies. From March of 2019 to the present, he has been a member of the board of directors of the Association of Business Simulation and Experiential Learning, specializing in innovations in education. He's written and presented numerous papers and articles in the United States and around the world. He also worked for the UN at the International Labor Organization, which was a specialized agency, and he was there for 25 years working on programs for employment generation in the developing world. He was a research economist from 1975 to 84 and a senior economist from 1984 to the present. This International Labor Organization was located in Geneva, Switzerland. He's taught at Duke University, NC State, University of Hawaii, NAU, and Coconino Community College over the years. Please join me in welcoming Rick Szal, who is going to present on the economic impact of COVID-19.
Thank you. Should I take over now, Paul?
Yes, it's all you, Rick.
Okay, so I'm gonna start this slideshow. Okay, just a little preamble before we go on. I'm going to say a lot of things today which many of you may find controversial. That's fine, because that's what economics is about. When we talk about economic issues, my colleagues and I are fond of saying it's a good thing that economists have two hands, because they can always say on the one hand it's this and on the other hand it's that. As you all probably know, economics is it's a science, but it's not an exact science. It's a social science. We study behavior. We study people's behavior, and we study what's happening based upon what is going on in the economy. So I will welcome any questions. If you don't agree with me, just remember that this is my opinion, what I'm going to be telling you. It may be right, it may be wrong. Okay, so let's get started. I want to give you a little bit background. I don't think I'm going to be telling anybody anything new if I tell you that the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic has been quite disastrous for the US economy. When I put these slides together, which was a couple of weeks ago, there were approximately 30 million US workers who were out of work, out of 160 million. If you go back to, let's say, beginning of March, the number of people in the labor force who were working were about 156 million. We have lost about 20 or 30 million of those workers in the interim. The current estimates of our US GDP indicate we may be down 30% from one year to the next. And of course, we're back now in a situation where we've locked down, so that may even deteriorate further. At the end, it says that by May 19th, which was a couple months ago, it was estimated that the cost to the U.S. totaled $1.3 trillion. I would love to show you something that I used to show my students to indicate what it means to say a trillion. That's a million, okay? So it's a lot of money just by May 19th. That is the equivalent, as it says at the end, of $10,385 per US household. The median household income is about $64,000 a year. Now, this is an interesting fact, this $64,000, which tends to indicate something that I point out to my students. The median household income is the appropriate figure when you're dealing with the distribution of income in the United States. It's not the average. The average income in that same year where you have $64,000 for the median, the average income was $70,000. Now, why is it higher? It's higher because statistically, the average is pulled up by extremes. I give them the example in my classes of the University of North Carolina. And I ask my students, what do you think the highest paid major is at the University of North Carolina? And the answers I usually get are engineering, business, that kind of thing. It's actually geography. And I'll tell you why it's geography, because Michael Jordan was a geography major. Okay, so when you average in his income with all the other incomes in the university, he pulls up the average for geography. That's why the average is not a good thing to use when you're talking about incomes, and it's more the median. The median means there are 50% of the households which make above that, and 50% which make below $64,000 a year. Now, if you take this equivalent of $10,385 per household, what it costs the U.S. Since May 9th up to May 19th, and divide that by 64,000, you're talking about a big proportion per household. Okay, major companies with at least 500 employees that have declared bankruptcy since the start. And this list, again, was created a little bit ago. I just added one today. I added Ann Taylor because that one was declared yesterday. These are the most important ones that everybody seems to recognize: Gold's Gym, Hertz, JCPenney, Neiman Marcus, Pier 1. And oh yes, and there was another one which I did want to add and I forgot to, which is Brooks Brothers. Brooks Brothers has been supplying men's clothing to presidents since the 1800s. It has now declared bankruptcy. That was just this week. The other potentials which have said that they may have to declare bankruptcy are listed on the other side: AMC Cinemas, Pizza Hut, Wendy's, Chuck E. Cheese. I think we all know those names. These are the big ones. These are the ones who have at least 500 employees or more, and a lot of them have a lot more than that. But if you look at the bottom, it says that over 25,000 small businesses have declared bankruptcy, and they're all going out of business. There's even more. That's the estimate as of a few weeks ago when I was putting these slides together. So it's pretty grim. It's pretty grim. I don't think that our economy is ever going to be again what it has been in the past. Now, one of the things that's important to economists is expectations. Both expectations on the viewpoint of business and expectations on the viewpoint of consumers. In the business sense, businesses will not be investing a lot of money in their business if they expect there to be a downturn in the US economy. Okay. Consumers, on the other hand, are going to put off purchases, particularly large purchases, if their expectation in terms of the possibility of them becoming unemployed is in the future. And in fact, now, there's a lot of them that are unemployed. So you can see what has happened here. You can see consumer sentiments on the left side, and you can see what has happened up until May. It's taken a nosedive. um, this is a problem for the economy because people will not be buying cars, people will not be buying TVs, people will be putting off large expenditures, and that means that that's going to create additional unemployment where people may have continued to have been employed before, because businesses are not going to continue to produce if they cannot sell their output. The only thing they can do then is to put it into inventory, and they don't want to do that because that costs money. So they will either lay off workers or fire them. On the other side, it's the tweets about the economy that have been shared between people, and you can see the tweets, how they look. This would be a favorite of the president, I think. You can see those dark blue areas are negative sentiments mentioned about the coronavirus in tweets. And the blue part are negative sentiments about the economy without mentioning the coronavirus. So what these two graphs tend to indicate is consumer and business expectations for the future are very grim, Now, for any of you who might like to look at some interesting data, I have here the pandemiccost.com. I won't go into it because I've reproduced a couple of the slides that will be coming up, but there are slides there which you can review, and actually they're probably more up to date than the ones I will show you because I think they update them weekly or monthly. Okay, here's one that shows you the pandemic costs. Okay, this is from that site. Okay, the red part is the entire cost to the economy. As I told you before, if you look on the left-hand side, the scale tells you that it's $10,300 and some dollars per household. On the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, it shows you how many billions of dollars the economy has lost. That's the red. Okay, the blue part is what we refer to as the statistical value of life. What's happening to the statistical value of life? I don't know whether or not you want me to go into a discussion of this, but if you would like to know in a nutshell how economists would value a life, they look at for one job, for example, let's say job A, let's say you're making $50,000 and there's a 100 out of 100,000 chance of dying. Okay. That means that your chance of dying over your income is 100 over 100,000. That's the risk of dying. Suppose there's another job where you get paid less, 40,000, but the chances of dying are only 20 out of 100,000. So then you would take the difference in the probability of death, which in this case would be 0.0008, and multiply the difference in the incomes. Divide the difference in the incomes. So you would be dividing $7,000 in this case by 0.0008. And that would give you something like $8,750,000 for the value of a life. That is the way they calculate this. And you can see, just, forget about the calculations, but just look at the trend. Okay, that blue was very low in March. Now all of a sudden the value of a life is going up because the probability of dying is higher than it was before in certain jobs, the only jobs that are available. Here is the daily estimate of the number of Americans working, and you can see what's happening. We went from, in March, we had 156 million workers working. Okay, we had a 3.5% unemployment rate. Now you can see what's happened since, because of closures, because of layoffs, because of firings, and you can see the extension through May. What's happening now, and we're back at that low point again because now everything's closing down again, at least through the Sun Belt where I'm living. Things are closing down. In California, they're closing down. In Florida, they're closing down. In Texas, they're closing down. So it's going to continue with that low trend for the number of Americans working. Here is the aggregate work hours. Now you can see here, the interesting thing about this graph is that dotted black line, which is at 90%, or an index of 90, setting February of 2020 as equal to 100%. That was the bottom of the recession that we had in 2008, 2009. It was only at 90%. You can see where we are now. We're way below that. We are below 70%. This is based upon the claims for unemployment insurance and some Google trends which were put together by McGraw-Hill, which is the resources that I was using for my courses. So you can see we're much worse off now in terms of the aggregate work hours of people than we were when we started the recession, when we had the recession in 2008, 2009. We were never this bad, never as bad as we are now. Now, here's our estimate of GDP. Now, if you're setting February 2020 equal to 100%, we started in March here, so we were already reducing our GDP slightly below 100%, but now we're down to about 70% or less now because we're closing down again. So GDP may go down even further. Okay? So we've lost a lot in terms of our income. Why are we concerned with GDP? Well, again, I tell my students, GDP, most people equate their command over goods and services with their standard of living. Okay, when GDP goes down, it means there's less goods on the market. And now people aren't working, their expectations are low, so their command over goods and services is much lower than it was before. That means that there's a reduction in the standard of living, and that's why we're so concerned about GDP and about the growth rate of GDP. Okay, here, it's kind of difficult to see if you look all the way on the right side of this, but you can see what has happened to unemployment. It is, this is the requests for unemployment compensation. Okay, it usually around 650,000 it was going, and all of a sudden in 2020, you can see where it's gone. We went from 1 week to the next, 6.9 million on March 28th applied. We've never had that many people apply for unemployment compensation. April 4th, another 6.6 million. April 11th, another 5.2 million. April 18th, another 4.2 million. It is incredible, the number of people that are applying for unemployment compensation. Okay, so as a result of all of that, between March and April, we had an additional 27.3 million people who applied for unemployment compensation. That's just an incredible amount of people. I'm going to say more about the compensation for unemployment in a bit, so we'll get into a discussion of that. Here is the weekly initial unemployment claims for 2020. You can see what's happened. January, February, March, we were all pretty low. And then all of a sudden, excuse me 1 second. Someone is making noise outside. I had to close the door. You can see what happened, okay? In March and April, these were initial claims, okay, initial. So it means that this very high one doesn't mean it went down. It means that we were adding. You can add all of these together. So the reason why the ones in May may be lower than the ones in April is because those people were already receiving it. So they're not going to apply again. All they have to do is renew their claim each week. That's why these claims on unemployment have gone so high, and it's why the government had to spend nearly $3 trillion on that first package of compensation for the COVID-19 that they did. What I want to stress is what's happening to different segments of the labor force. Okay, you can see here what has happened to unemployment in different segments of the labor force. You can see the top one is for all the white workers. We had a 3.1% unemployment rate in February. March, it went a bit higher. And then in April, it was up to 14.2%. But note in particular, the one below that, the African-American workers, all Black workers. They are suffering a higher unemployment rate. I think you may have heard this on the news, that some of the people of color are suffering much worse than the white workers. The same thing occurs when you look at the bottom. There it breaks it down into men and women. Men's unemployment rate was 12.8%, women's was 15.8%, but all either Black men or Black women were higher than that. So there's been a differentiated effect on the African American populations. I don't have the statistics. I was trying to put them together, but in fact, as you will see in one of the graphs that's coming up, it's even worse for Hispanics. Hispanics have an even higher unemployment rate than African Americans. So there is this differential unemployment between different groups in the labor force. Now, this is the graph I was talking about, okay? If you look at this unemployment by race, you look at the, this, can I move this? Let me see. I can't move this, but look, above, the highest one here would be Hispanics. Below that is the Black workers. Oh, there it is. Hispanic workers have the highest unemployment rate, nearly 20%. The Black workers had about 17%. The total labor force had 16%. The Asians had below that about 14%, and the white were about 13%. So you can again see the differential effect of this. And while this is the case for what's happened since the pandemic, please note what's happened over time. I mean, we have the same kind of unemployment rates, relationships between them. Asians and white people are kind of follow the same, and they're pretty close together. The total labor force is slightly above that, and you will note that the Black workers and the Hispanics have consistently had a much higher unemployment rate than the other groups. Okay, no matter what the year, you can see the years listed on the horizontal axis at the bottom. Okay, but it's just gone through the roof in 2020. But those differentials between the different segments of the labor force have remained the same. Okay, now, as you may have heard on the news or read, because of the first package that the government negotiated for assistance to workers for unemployment, they were giving $600 per week as a supplemental unemployment benefit. That's over and above what the state benefit would be. So it's $600 plus the state benefit. Now, I'm not exactly sure if these people have calculators in Washington or not. If you take $600 per week and you divide that by a 40-hour week, it comes to a $15 an hour wage. That's higher than the minimum wage in most of the states where people are getting unemployment insurance. I think, in fact, the highest that I've seen is $15. I think in Washington, possibly Oregon, they're about $15 a week. And around Los Angeles, I think it's around $15 a week. But in Arizona, where I'm living, it's $13 an hour, sorry, $13 an hour, okay? So the criticism that's come out now is, you know, if you're a worker and you're getting this $600 plus you're getting a state benefit for unemployment insurance, why should I go back to work if I'm making the minimum wage? If I'm a minimum wage worker, it pays for me to stay unemployed. So right now, if you're following the news, they are negotiating this in Washington. I read an article today which said that there's a possibility that they might bring that $600 down to $100. I think that's a big jump. Let's talk brass tacks, okay? The federal minimum wage is $7.25, which is ridiculous, but it's $7.25 and they haven't changed it because in most cases it's either states or municipalities which will determine what the minimum wage is. For example, in Arizona, where I'm living, the state minimum wage is $12, but in Flagstaff, it's $13. Okay, so there are these differences, and there's differences between states. But the point is, if they were going to give this kind of unemployment insurance, and if they were going to get workers to go back to work, you want to give them less than they'd be making if they go back to work. Otherwise, there's no sense. I'd rather make more money and just stay unemployed. So what they should have done is to take the $7.25, multiply by a 40-hour work week, and you come to around $290. Okay, make it $300. So if they had offered $300, they would have been giving people the equivalent of the federal minimum wage, but they didn't do that. And I don't know where they got $600. Now the problem is, well, that's going to run out at the end of this month, okay? So, and they're now negotiating whether or not there's going to be an extension of that, but it's certainly going to be less than 600 because this has been a disincentive for workers to go back to work. It's just a disincentive. If your employer calls you and you're a minimum wage worker and you're going to make less going back to work, why would you do it? It doesn't make sense. Okay? Now, here is how is unemployment going to fall? How fast will unemployment fall? Well, that's a good question. That's a good question. Here you have the unemployment rate, and you can see what it has been. Okay, you can see what's happened to it in 2020. Unemployment, because of, and unemployment is included furloughs as well as firings and so forth. So it's just sort of gone through the roof. So what we really are interested in is, okay, it looks like we're coming closer right now to the possibility of getting a vaccine. I just heard yesterday on the news that the government has given a $2 billion contract to a couple places that are preparing to produce the vaccine to get 100 million doses of the vaccine before the end of the year. I don't know whether that's going to come off or not. It depends upon whether or not the drug gets approved and whether or not it's found to be safe. And next year we would be buying a lot more. Remember that the population of the United States is around 350 million, 340 million. So 100 million doses by the end of this year is only sufficient to reach 1/3 of our population. So we will have to move as quickly as possible once there is the vaccine. But then the question becomes, what's going to happen to unemployment? Now, what you have to realize is that because people more or less have been out of work since March, there's been a loss of a linkage between labor and their employers. That linkage has been lost. People have been looking around for jobs and so forth. There's the viewpoint of people, as we saw before, from expectations that there are these persistent consequences, and everybody keeps talking about the long run consequences of COVID-19. So it looks very bleak to most of the workforce. Some of the workers, because they've now been unemployed since March, may have lost some of the skills they had before, and it will take time for them to gear up again once they get back to work. I'm going to tell you some information later about certain businesses which have designed replacements for workers so that we may have permanently lost some jobs. So it's important now to find out what's going to go on once we can get out of this. Now here are some graphs which show you what has happened to unemployment. You'll notice in the horizontal axis here, we have years. Each one of these years corresponds to a recession that we had in the economy. And you can see after the recession ended what was happening to unemployment. You will see the last one on the far right was the one that we had in 2008, 2009. Our unemployment rate went up to around 10%, and then it slowly went back down. And eventually, by the beginning of this year, we were down to 3.5%. But that means, if you look at the box on the right side, that the rate of decline of unemployment was about 0.5% a year, 0.5% a year, okay, during those 11. And they're all more or less the same rate of decline, okay. Now, let me tell you what the implication of that is if we start thinking about what's going to happen to our unemployment rate, okay. You can read this yourself, but if you assume that that's correct, that the unemployment rate is going to go down by 0.5% percentage point per year, it will take us 50 years to get back to 3.5% unemployment. 50 years, okay? Now, you have probably heard recently the government was bragging that unemployment went down to 11%. Last month, and there were a bunch of jobs that were created. I just want to, from an economic standpoint, I would like you to understand a few things about unemployment that I may explain these later. The first thing I would like to tell you is how the government defines unemployment. This is very interesting, and my students are flabbergasted when I tell them this. What happens is the Bureau of Labor Statistics calls 60,000 households each month, and they ask them, now listen carefully, they ask them, have you been employed in paid employment for 1 hour in the last week? 1 hour. If you say yes, you're considered employed. I don't think 1 hour of employment should be considered employed. That's part-time. That's part-time. So when this unemployment, this is the first point I'm going to make. I'm going to make other ones. When this unemployment rate went down to 11%, what was happening? You see, these were people who may have been searching around for some type of employment and maybe got something where they worked a couple hours, but it was only for 1 day or 2 days, and then they were back out of work again. But then, because they made some income that week, they could not apply for unemployment insurance, which made it look as if they're employed, which made us, the requests for unemployment insurance would have gone down, and our unemployment rate would have gone down. But these people are still unemployed. And even if you found a job which was consistently part-time, you still may be what my second point deals with, and that's underemployed. You may want to work 40 hours, but you can only find a job which gives you 5 hours a week. Okay, you take it so that you can make some money, but you are underemployed. You are working at less than your maximum productivity or less than you were working before. That's the second point. Okay, so the unemployment rate does not measure this underemployment. You know, if you have a PhD and you're flipping burgers in Burger King, you're employed, but you're not working at your maximum productivity. So in fact, the economy could do better. Okay. The third point is something that's called discouraged workers. Discouraged workers. Discouraged workers are people who have perhaps looked around for a while to try and find a job, and then all of a sudden they decide, well, gee, there's nothing out there. There are no jobs out there for me to find, so they stop. Now, if I call you from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and I say you have to actively be seeking employment to be considered part of the labor force. If I ask you, have you actively been seeking employment in the last week? And you say, no, I've given up. You're not part of the labor force, and therefore you cannot be considered to be unemployed. Although technically speaking, I think you can all recognize that you are unemployed. You're unemployed because you would take a job if there were one available, but you've just stopped looking. Therefore, the government does not consider you to be part of the labor force, and you cannot be, and you're not unemployed. So there are all of these things which influence this unemployment rate, and I think you have to take them all into account. Just because the unemployment rate goes down doesn't mean it's necessarily a good thing. I tell my students sometimes that if you look at the data which came out of the last recession that we had, you would see that you'll see a report in a newspaper which says the economy created 150,000 jobs last month and the unemployment rate went up. That doesn't seem to be logical. It doesn't seem to be logical. If the economy created 150,000 jobs, how could the unemployment rate go up? Well, it goes up because some of those people who were discouraged workers now see that there are jobs being created and they come back into the labor force because now they are actively seeking employment. Therefore, they are now again considered unemployed. So the unemployment rate can go up even if we're creating jobs. So, you know, when you look at these unemployment statistics, look at them a bit skeptically. You have to understand what's behind it. And just because it goes down doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. Okay. Now, I want to link this now with a pet peeve of mine. This relates to the minimum wage, and I think the minimum wage combined with what's happening during the pandemic has a very negative effect on now, but also in the future, what's going to happen in the future. Let me explain a little bit about this. This is my economics part of it. For those of you who may have had an economics course, you may understand this. It's all based upon, it's very simplified demand and supply curves. You have a short-term demand for labor. That's the demand for labor. What is the demand for labor based upon? It is called the marginal revenue product of labor. What's the marginal revenue product? It means how much do you produce and what's the price of it that comes into a business. Multiply the two together, that's the marginal revenue product. You have to make money for me in order for me to hire you. I want to go back to that dear man, Adam Smith, who wrote that book in 1776 called The Wealth of Nations. In there, he says, businesses are not in the business of being benevolent. They're in the business of making a profit. Okay, if you don't make a profit for me, I don't really want you around. Okay, I'm not going to keep you working for me if you are costing me money. So the demand for labor is based upon that marginal revenue product. You have to make a profit for me. Profitability is the bottom line. Profitability of businesses. Okay, then you have a supply of labor, which is based upon how much time workers will be willing to put into working, depending upon what the wage rate is. Okay, now from economics, where those two graphs cross is called the equilibrium point, and that determines a wage, an equilibrium wage, and it also determines the number of people that are employed. Now, you have to think about what the minimum wage is. The minimum wage in economics is something that could be referred to as a floor price. It's got to be above that equilibrium wage because otherwise it wouldn't make any sense. If it was below that equilibrium wage, well, it would just be automatically pushed up to the equilibrium wage. But if it's above, it is something like that, okay? You put the minimum wage above the equilibrium wage, okay? Now what happens? Okay, where is demand and supply in this? You have supply, workers are now willing to supply more of their labor, which comes off of the SL curve, the supply curve, but businesses are only willing to demand what comes off the demand curve. So what do you have? You have that number which are going to be employed because that's what businesses are going to demand. And that is what's called unemployment. Okay, now this is a pure economic analysis of what happens with the minimum wage. You will create some unemployment when you raise the minimum wage. Okay, in the short run, when Flagstaff increased their minimum wage last January 1st to $13. Okay, the economy was doing great. The unemployment rate in the overall economy was 3.5%. So in the short run, That's why I say this demand curve is a short-term demand curve, because in the short run, you're not going to notice much of a difference. Okay, things will not change because businesses need a period of time to adjust. Okay, over time, you will see that adjustment. Over time, you will see that adjustment, but you won't see it in the short run. Then the real problem, as far as I am concerned, is the people who are going to lose their jobs because of continuously increasing the minimum wage are going to be the neediest people in the population. Obviously, if you have a business and you have determined that you're going to get rid of some of your workers and maybe substitute robots or something else for those workers, who are you going to get rid of? You're going to get rid of the least productive workers. And the least productive workers are the ones who will be hurt the most by this continuous increase in the minimum wage. This is purely an economic analysis. And I would love for everybody to make a higher income, but it's just a question of who is going to suffer as a result of that. Now, one of the things which I'm going to talk to you about a little bit more as we go on is how could we solve this problem without a minimum wage? When I was growing up, I grew up in Chicago. I went to a technical high school. And interestingly enough, I'll just give you a little bit details. Sorry if I'm boring you. This was a big high school. It's called Lane Tech. Okay, there were 6,000 male students. It was all male at the time. Okay, everybody during the first 2 years would determine what kind of technical field they were interested in. And for the last 2 years of high school, you would spend half of your day learning that trade. Okay, so it was a school where I was not supposed to, I was not trained to go to college. Okay, it wasn't a college prep school, but I lucked out. I mean, I tried college and I liked it and it worked out for me. But the point is I wasn't trained for that. There were 6,000 students in that school when I was there. Now, I looked up the statistics today just to give you an example. In Chicago, during the late 1960s and early 1970s, there was a big movement in the United States to get everybody to go to college. Everybody was told you should go to university, you should go to college. That's where you get a good job. That's where you make a high income. So the high school where I went, I think it was around the mid 70s, they transformed the school into a college prep, and they made it co-ed. So now it's a male and female high school. That's fine, but they have gotten rid of the technical component. I think this has been a trend throughout the United States that we have diminished the availability of technical training for those students who may not wish to go to college. You know, I'm fond of saying to people that college is not for everyone, but education is for everyone. So we should be providing more technical education for those people who decide they're not going to go to college. The other nice thing about thinking about that is that you would be reaching the neediest of the poor, the neediest groups of the poor, by supplying that kind of training for them. So what could happen here if we were to rethink our educational system and put back into our educational system more technical training, create one or a few high schools where it specifically deals with technical education? You could then, there's two ways to look at it, but you could then, first let me do this. Sorry, I'm putting the cart before the horse. I wanted to show you this. The amount of unemployment that's lost through the minimum wage is dependent upon the slope of that demand curve. Now you can see that the slope of the short-term demand curve is steeper than the long-term demand curve. Now, why is that the case? Because in the longer term, businesses have the ability to make changes. They can get rid of workers. They can hire some robots. They can get some other ways to economize on labor, okay? And they will figure out ways to deal with less labor. So in the long run, you will be losing more employment than you would in the short run. That's why that curve is not as steep as the other one. Okay, now let me go back to my other point. What could we do about this? Suppose we did provide better technical training, technical and vocational education to some of our workers. We could then shift that demand curve to there, okay? Now, the demand and supply would be intersecting at the same wage rate that we had the minimum wage, but now we would have workers who are trained and who are able to go out into the workforce. Clearly, there are technical education things available, but they're expensive, and they're not provided by in most cases, they're not provided by the state. They are schools where you have to pay to go to the school. Well, the neediest of our people do not have the money to do that. So they can't get that technical education. And then there's internships and all that kind of thing. So my point is that governments need to start thinking about increasing the training for people who may not wish to go to college. And I'm going to give you some, there's been a change in how people now look at going to the university. They're beginning to think, is it really worth it? Is it worth it to go to the university, given that tuition is going up enormously? Is it really worth it for me to go and pay all that money, spend 4 years there, and then I might end up working at Sam's Club, stocking shelves? Is it really worth it? Okay, so I'm going to talk more about that in a minute, but I did want to point this out to you that this is a standard analysis of economics concerning the minimum wage. Now, I'm going to tell you there are some economists who will differ with me, and they will say, well, yes, it will create some unemployment, but we don't care, because the increase in the wage for those people who are employed will tend to decrease inequality in our society. Well, yes, that may be true to a certain extent, but let's think about who the people are who lose their jobs. And as I said before, I want to reiterate, it's probably the neediest of our population which will end up losing their jobs. Okay, wage inequality in the United States. And this is where I want to show you, this is where I'm going to use what I just talked about to show you the actual thing that's happened. Look at the second paragraph here. From 1978 to 2009, people in the top 20% of the income distribution in the United States experienced an increase in their average real pre-tax household income of 45%. Okay, 45%. Whereas those people in the lowest 20% of incomes had an increase of only 4%. That's what's happening. And the reason is, I'm going to show you a couple graphs here, okay? The reason is, look at the top one. You can see that because we have had this emphasis, de-emphasis, I should say, in technical education, we have had a very large increase in the supply of unskilled workers. A very large increase in the supply of unskilled workers, but a very small increase in the demand for them. Okay, what happens? The wage goes down from 3 to 2. Here, in the second one at the bottom, let's say that these are the skilled workers or the higher trained workers. Okay, we have had an increase in supply, but the increase in supply has been less than the increase in demand. So what happens? Their wage rate goes up from P1 to P2. That's what's been happening. And that is because we have been increasing the supply of unskilled workers, whereas the demand for those workers has not been following suit. So as a consequence, their incomes have gone down. Now let me show you what has happened to, here is what I was talking about before. These are some things that I have gathered from some articles that I've read about the changing attitudes of students toward college education. In 2018, a combined 41% of Americans aged 18 to 24 years said they would attend a trade school over college for career opportunities and high pay potential if it were available. That means it's not there. 41%. So what do these people do? They go out and take an unskilled job without training, or they may just sort of go to college even though they don't know why they're there. Second point, people who argue that college is not worth it contend that the debt from college loans is too high and delays graduates from saving for retirement, buying a house, getting married. They say many successful people never graduated from college and that many jobs, especially trade jobs, do not require college degrees. Okay, a good argument. Many college graduates are employed in jobs that do not require college degrees. That we all know. Up until last May, I taught for 13 years at NAU. I had a lot of students who had graduated that were part of my classes, and I end up seeing them in Walmart, stocking shelves, or in Sam's Club, or working in Amco at the parts desk. They don't need college degrees for this. I think you all know also that many secretarial jobs these days do not require college degrees, but in many cases, secretaries do have a college education. Okay, many recent college graduates are underemployed. That's true. I just happened to see one of my former students who was flipping burgers in town. Learning a trade profession is a better option than college for many young adults. Well, that comes from the first point. 41% of Americans aged 18 to 24 would want to go to trade school if it were available. A college degree is no guarantee of workplace benefits. In 2013, 68.9% of employed new college graduates did not receive health insurance through their employers. Many employers now are trying to avoid the benefit sides. Okay, so they may hire people as consultants. If you hire a worker as a consultant, you are not required to pay them benefits. That means health, that means Social Security, that means some of the other things, and that means unpaid vacation. Sorry, not paid vacation, but they have to take unpaid vacation. In 2011, only 27.2% received retirement coverage. So these people who are being hired as consultants don't even get a retirement from the firm that they're doing, like a 401k. And that was reduced from 41.5% in the year 2000. Okay, so this whole movement has been for businesses to economize on their expenses per employee. Then last couple points, over 54% of those who enter college eventually drop out. That's true. I've done some analysis of the university where I was working, Northern Arizona University. It is a university where basically they have to accept everyone from the state of Arizona who applies. Okay, they have a 98% acceptance rate for the freshman class, and the graduation rate of the class is 56%. Okay, that's what happens. Students come in, they're not exactly sure they really want to be there. They don't work very hard. They don't apply themselves. And then they end up dropping out. And the last point, the time spent in college earning a degree can often be put to better use gaining experience and income, by the way, and income. They're giving up four years of income and training and experience where they could be working themselves into better positions. I think all of you must know, if you need some plumbing done at your house, you call a plumber. 9 times out of 10, they're going to tell you, oh, gee, I can't get there today. I just had a plumber that I called a couple of weeks ago and said, oh, I can't get there until next week. I said, but I got a problem now. We don't have enough of these trained technical and vocational education students there in our workforce, and you can make a lot of money doing it. A driver of a 16-wheeler on the road, he's no longer a driver now, he's a technician. That whole thing is operated by a computer. So you can easily make, if you're willing to do that job and be on the road, you can easily make a six-figure amount. We don't have automobile mechanics anymore. We have automobile technicians. Again, they have to be trained in the use of computers because everything now with automobiles is run by a computer. So these are jobs where people can make a lot of money. if they could get the proper training, and if those people who are the neediest in our population could get some kind of support for this, and that could come through our educational system, through our high schools, our public high schools. Okay, here's what's happening to the minimum wage. You can see what's happening. The minimum wage, the nominal minimum wage, nominal means what you're actually getting paid. The nominal minimum wage is the red one. Okay, it's been going up slowly on average over time. But the problem is prices are going up too. And because prices go up, there's the real wage becomes lower. Okay, prices are eating away, even though the nominal wage, the money you're making goes up, but so does the price level. We all know what inflation is. Inflation eats away at your purchasing power. So if you receive the same amount one year to the next, you will actually be making a lower real income because inflation will have eaten away at that. So this is what's been happening. So up to 2018, the minimum wage was below what it was around 1968. So that's what's been happening in our economy. Okay, I wanted to end on a positive note. So I took this out of Yahoo Finance the other day, and it showed the reduction in initial job claims for the last 9 weeks of the pandemic. And you can see that in just about every state, it's gone down. Okay, but the question is, why has it gone down? And again, I'm going to go back to what I said before. You remember I told you, if you make any money this week, you have to declare it. Or either you don't apply for unemployment insurance, or you have to declare to them that you made an income, which disqualifies you from getting the unemployment insurance. Okay, so you may be working just a part-time job when you want a full-time job. You may have come back into the labor force and maybe taken a part-time job, although you were full-time before. You may be making a lower income. This has absolutely nothing to do with how much money people are making. It simply is a reduction in the unemployment rate. Okay. So it's positive, but the question is, you have to think about it in terms of the problems with dealing with the unemployment rate and unemployment insurance. Okay, some recent articles that I wanted to list for you, in case you're interested in looking them up, related to employment effects of COVID. Fed officials warn of a long road ahead for U.S. economic recovery. That was the Federal Reserve, and it came through Reuters News. Remember what I told you before about how long it's going to take us to get back to where we were last January. It could, I mean, if it follows past patterns, it could take us up to 50 years. Second one, a major reallocation shock from coronavirus will see 42% of lost jobs evaporate. That means, that's a University of Chicago study. It means that 42% of the jobs that have been lost, that have been furloughed or fired, are not coming back, will not come back. Why is that? Because in the interim, employers have had the opportunity to figure out, how can I do with less employment? What other things can I do? Remember what I talked about, those demand curves, and I showed you the steeper one and the less steep one. Okay, now all of a sudden, that demand curve is going to be less steep, flatter, so that it's going to cause more unemployment. And some of the jobs that have been lost or laid off or furloughed are not coming back. And the University of Chicago has estimated that could be up to 42%. Okay, the third one, they just couldn't afford to bring us back. Many furloughs turn into permanent layoffs. That's the same thing. That comes out of the Government Bureau of Labor Statistics. Gap rushes in more robots to warehouses to solve virus disruption. Okay, let me tell you what happened. Gap is one of the largest retailers in the United States. In fact, It is the largest specialty retailer in the United States. The largest, because it's not just Gap. It's Gap, it's Banana Republic, it's Old Navy, it's something called Hill City, it's one called Intermix, and it also includes Athleta. Okay, all of those together. So it is the largest specialty retailer in the United States. What happened was when the virus hit and when we had closures, and when they also had to lay off some workers or furlough workers, they decided they didn't want to go out of business. So in order to fill their online orders, they bought some robots from Japan who can fill the boxes and send them out. Okay, they spent a lot of money on this, and they rushed these robots in so they wouldn't lose time and they could continue their business. Okay, now think about it logically. If you are a businessman, I spend a lot of money getting these robots. Am I going to bring my workers back when this coronavirus is over? I don't think so. I don't think so. What would I do with the robots? I'm not going to junk them. I spent a lot of money getting them. So those jobs are probably not going to be coming back. Probably not. And then the last one relates to some of the talk I had about the minimum wage. There was an article by Yahoo Finance about discussing with employers. There were some minimum wages in certain states which were to increase on the 1st of July. They didn't change that. They didn't postpone it. Okay, so now you got workers who have been laid off and you increase the minimum wage while they're off work. Okay, you may not be paying it right now, but are you going to bring them back at a higher wage than before, given the fact that you've probably been suffering a great deal during this coronavirus, and you need to increase your profitability? Okay, am I going to bring them back and pay them a higher wage? I don't know. I'm not sure. I may look for other solutions. You will see lots of things on television about the unlivable wage in the United States. That is correct. What I am proposing here is that we try to give people more skills, and from those skills to increase their incomes, not just to give them money through unemployment insurance or through something else. I'm very fond of the old quotation which says, if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for today. But if you teach him how to fish, he'll eat for the rest of his life. And that's my plea. My plea is we need to reevaluate our educational system, because students are going away from college now, even if we don't change. And it would be nice if we could give them the tools for them to increase their productivity and therefore get a higher income later in life. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that's it for me. I'm just past 6:30. I was told I should try to keep this to about an hour and then leave a half an hour for discussion.
All right. So that being said, thank you very much, Rick, for a very informative presentation. So in your participant box, as we have in the past, just click on the raised hand if you'd like to ask Rick a question yourself, and I'll call on you. Otherwise, you can type in your question in the chat and I can read it to Rick. So it's now open for Q&A. Okay, we've got questions. So let's see, we have either Mr. Cindy Edwards or Cindy Edwards. Go ahead, you can ask the first question.
Mr. Cindy Edwards.
Okay.
Very fascinating talk. Thank you very much. One thing I would like you to address is the big disconnect between the stock market and what you portray as our economic outlook. And maybe a second question you could mention too is that the drop in GDP that I see in the newspapers is much less than what you're stating as. Usually they would say 8% or something like that. Could you address that? Thank you.
Yeah, well, these the estimates that I gave you were a little bit, perhaps you might consider them out of date, because there may be a month or two out of date. That was the estimate that I had. I have seen an estimate more recently, which has even come as low as 5%. So, and I think what has happened is there has been some positive moves. The healthcare system has been able to develop ways to treat the virus better than they could in the past, although we're still having deaths, but they're going down. The deaths are going down. The infections are going up, but the deaths are going down. Wait, your other question was, the disconnect between the stock market. Look, this is something I can't even answer to you. I don't know what's going on. The stock market's going up while infections are going up, while furloughs are going up, while layoffs are going up. I can't understand it. While things are closing down, I think the stock market, you know, if you look across the United States, the real problems right now are in the South and in the Southwest. It's California, it's Texas, it's Arizona, it's Florida. I wanted to get some additional information on this and try to see if what the relationship was between closing down and what is happening to employment and so forth in the various states. The problem is that this is a mixed bag. It's apples and oranges. In some states, it's municipalities which are making decisions about closing down. In other states, it's the governor who's making a decision. In other states, it is counties which are making the decision. So you can't get a clear picture of everything. For example, in Flagstaff, where I live, during the first wave, if you want to consider it that, the first wave of this coronavirus, the mayor of Flagstaff closed down the city before the governor of Arizona did. So we were closed down ahead of time. So if you look now at the northeast of the country, and forget about the south and southwest, they're doing quite well. New York is already in its fourth stage of reopening the economy. So I think that what the stock market is doing is possibly couple things. I think one of the things is they're reacting to those states on the East Coast where opening up seems to be proceeding very well. The other thing is I think every time you see another thing about another announcement about a potential vaccine, you will see the stock market goes up. Okay, so I think that we're coming very close now to a time when I think we may have a vaccine. And if we do, then things will start to move again. But it's a question of who's going to get access to the vaccines and how quickly we can get that done. I don't know if this answers your question. I really can't explain the stock market. I don't know what's going on. And as far as the other thing, it may be correct, but you know, you're going to get estimates of how much GDP has been affected, which are going to change from one week to the next, depending upon what's happening with unemployment and with closures and with furloughs and so forth. So I think those estimates are going to change a lot. You're probably correct. It's probably not as much as I may have presented here, but that was the estimate that was done in May and June.
Okay, Rick, we have a question on the chat that I'm going to read to you. This is from Sandy. Could the extended economic recovery be mitigated by the Fed continuing to inject more money as in the CARES Act?
You know, the short and long answer, in my opinion, is no. Okay, I would like to go back to one of the. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen anymore. Let me share my screen again. Okay, now I want to go back to something I showed you before. This one. Okay. Now, on this one, I had a little note which I meant to put in, which says you can see that these lines look almost all the same for the reduction in unemployment over the period of coming out of a recession. Now, what it said in the article where this was presented is that the authors argued that these declines in the rate of unemployment rather than are the result of frictions in the labor market. Matching between unemployed workers and firms is slow and seems to be unaffected by monetary or fiscal policy actions, which differed massively in some cases from one recession to another. So while for each of these recessions, you may have had different fiscal and monetary policies which were attempting to intervene into the economy, the rate of decline seems to be about the same, as you can see from these. Does that answer your question?
So we have a new question from Kent and Mira Rosman. I'm going to unmute them. Oh, there we go. Go ahead, Kent or Mira.
Yes, in view of the length of time it takes to reconstitute employment, like you're even talking about possibly 50 years, I'm wondering if it isn't time to revisualize the whole economic theory of labor, markets, and capital, et cetera, and try and come up with some kind of different way of approaching the use of human beings in a mechanized society.
Yeah, on this particular point, I think that one of the problems is, technology changes very rapidly these days, much more than it used to. And I don't think that the labor force has the potential to adjust to those changes very quickly. I'll tell you, I'll go back to when I was in high school. I told you I went to this technical high school. I was trained to be a printer. And some of you who are closer to my age might remember something called a linotype machine. I was trained on a linotype machine. Well, I would have been out of work many years ago because they don't exist anymore. From the advent of computers, linotype machines disappeared. So people don't, the labor force and the training that we get do not seem to adjust very quickly to changes in technology. I was reading an article the other day about our knowledge base in society. And if you go back to the early 1800s, it said that the article, I'll summarize it for you. The article said that our stock of knowledge in the world increased doubled about every 100 years. If you come up to the time about the First World War, it was doubling at about a rate of 25 years. Now they're saying that by the year 2030, the stock of knowledge, now get this, now listen to this, the stock of knowledge is going to double every 13 hours. Every 13 hours. Yeah. So I've told this to my students, and I've said, whatever you're learning here in class, you better remember that you got to keep up with things. You got to keep up with the changes in technology because they're going to be faster and faster as we go on. And I'm sure all of you can recognize how technology changes from one day to the next. So I think your point is correct. But I also think that what we need to do is to create, even my students, they don't recognize all of the abilities that they have in terms of keeping up with what's going on. Many of them don't know how to Google things or how to use things. When I was young, we had an Encyclopedia Britannica. Well, nobody wanted to pick that up and go through the pages, find the right place, and then read the whole thing. But now you can just say to Google or to Alexa or something else, what is this or what is that? And you can get the answer. And I've been trying to train my students to use all the technology that they have to keep up with things as they go on. Kent, does that answer your question?
So we have a question now from Phil Lyons. Phil, go ahead and ask your question. Just trying to unmute you here. Let's see here. Come on. Phil, are you there?
Yeah, I am. I thought
Okay.
you were unmuting me.
No, I was trying to. I think we were
okay.
doing it simultaneously.
Okay. So I'll start again. Rick, I said, first of all, it's a superb presentation and your graphics were excellent. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
A question regarding the robots and your feeling regarding the minimum wage and the marginal utility of a worker in terms of their production, et cetera, et cetera. From everything I've read over the years, the biggest driver by far in the economy is consumer spending.
That's right.
And robots don't go to restaurants or buy cars, et cetera. I'm wondering if you think that business will take that into consideration. In other words, if they're looking at replacing a $15 an hour person, because I'm going to be arbitrary here, because they're only producing $12 worth of profit, how would they factor in the fact that that consumer will spend money, whereas a robot will not? And then I have an observation / question regarding the recovery. And the slide you have up there right now. This event, as I think we all know, is different than anything we've had in the last century. And while I don't believe in Trump's V-shaped recovery during COVID, I suspect that a year or two after a vaccine, there will be something like a V-shaped recovery. And I'm wondering if you agree that that will reduce substantially your 50-year projection of having to recover from the unemployment.
Yeah, Phil, I was just giving you the statistics that have been calculated from these past things. I don't believe it's 50 years. I believe we're going to get there a lot faster than 50 years. The question is how fast, I don't know, but I don't want anybody to think, as you said, that Trump's V-shaped recovery is just around the corner. It is not. It is not. Businesses have now, when you go back to what I was talking about the demand for labor, businesses have now had a time to adjust to the fact that they're closed. And they've had ways, some of them anyways, like Gap, for example, have had time to think about how they're going to adjust to this current situation. And they found a way to do it. I think you're right. I mean, consumption is the driving force in the economy. 70% of our GDP is consumption in this economy. So the question is how people are going to be doing that. One of the reasons why I was putting my emphasis on education and our educational system was to just overcome that situation. You know, when you have robots, they may replace a worker today, but somehow that worker is going to be able to learn how to work with the robots. See, and also somebody's got to build those robots, and somebody's got to program them, and somebody's got to repair them. So we need to adjust our situation and not think about having people working in a factory on a machine as we did in the past, but rather how can we fit the workers into this new paradigm that we're moving into in the workforce and in the labor force and in our economy. And I'll reiterate one more time that I don't think this is a 50-year recovery. I think it's going to be faster than that. How fast, I don't even want to venture to say. I hope that responds to your question.
Yes, thank you.
We have a question on the chat that I'll read to you. This is from Sandy. While you were at Lane Tech, I was at Senn High School, where most went to college afterwards. Then it was nearly free and meant better jobs, more income and retirement plans after. We need a Green New Deal, government-funded college and apprenticeships for non-college workers. Your opinion?
I think you're right. I mean, if by the New Deal you mean something like the WPA, which came about after the Great Depression, I think yes. I think we need that kind of thing. The question is, where does the money come from? The WPA was look. everybody complains about the fact that our infrastructure is crumbling in this country. We need to get more people into redoing that infrastructure, bridges, roads, so forth. We all know that they're deteriorating over time. How we do that, that's where our government comes in. You know, there's got to be better planning. There's got to be, I don't know where all the money disappears to right now, to be honest with you. We used to be able to do so much more in this country with so much less. And now all of a sudden, there's no money to do anything. So I agree. I agree totally that we need a new deal, Sandy. And but the design of that, we have to leave to the people that are in Washington. And let's just hope they can do better than they've been doing recently.
So, Rick, we have a question on the chat from Greg Pratt. Could you discuss the impact of the significant increase in the national debt on the ability to sustain economic recovery?
Okay, the national debt is something which everybody worries about. I go through, there's something, if you would be interested, there is something that's called the national debt clock. I don't know if any of you have ever looked at it. I could see if I could pull it up, but it's quite an interesting thing to look at. Let me see. Are you still seeing my screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay, here's the national debt clock. All right, you can see what's happening here. There's the U.S. national debt.
You need to exit out of the PowerPoint and
Oh, okay. Jeepers. What have I done here? Hang on a second. Where is?
if you click on share screen again, you might be able to see a screen where the web browser is up that has the clock on it. You can then click on that, and then that will show up instead of the PowerPoint.
Jeepers. Now I've lost everything. Okay, now I got to exit out of this. Okay.
So now hit shared screen.
Share screen, and now I can find this other thing.
Exactly. You'll find it, the web browser with the clock on it.
Okay, now can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, you can see what's happening up in the upper left-hand corner. That is our U.S. national debt, 26 trillion, 559 billion, 806 million, and you can see the interest that's going up every second. I have this little game with my students. I start this at the beginning of a class, and then I end it at the end. Now look, the national debt is something which a lot of people worry about. There's only one worry that we need with the national debt. You see, the national debt is made up of 3 different components. First component is, it is things that they sell to us. You're all familiar with savings bonds. Okay, that's borrowing money from people in our economy, and then eventually you're going to pay them back and pay them interest with it. Okay, that doesn't hurt us at all, in the sense that if we reissue that when it comes due, well, it's just transferring money from one American to another American. Second component of that is it's money that the government borrows from Social Security, from some of these other government agencies who have money, the Treasury, those kind of people. So again, we are just transferring money between different government agencies. That doesn't hurt our economy because everything stays here. The third component is foreign governments. Okay, you know, when we normally import much more than we export. Okay, that means that foreign governments are gaining money from us through their exports to us, which become imports for us. Okay, what do they do with that money? They don't want to just sit on it. So they buy government securities in the United States. Now, what you don't want is for some foreign government to own 51% of the United States, which could happen if they owned that much of our national debt. It's far from that right now. I think foreign governments now have about a 21% stake in our national debt. So by buying these securities, okay. So there's really not too much to worry about in terms of the national debt, and I don't think it ever has to be repaid. We don't really have to worry much about repaying it, because we will just, that which is issued to American citizens will just be reissued once it comes due. And from other government agencies, well, we're just paying interest to Social Security, which helps a lot of people that are going to retire in the future, or to the Treasury. Okay, so it's funding government operations. So those are the things we don't have to worry about. But what we do have to worry about is just make sure that we don't have, foreign governments don't own the largest proportion of our national debt.
So Rick, I have a question for you. This is host prerogative. I get to ask a question
Sure.
every so often. If you were hired tomorrow by the Trump administration to help lead their response, which has been sorely lacking, what would your top 3 initiatives be to help recover the economy?
Well, first of all, I don't think I would accept a job with with the current administration. But you ask a very difficult question. I mean, the first thing is, and I think they are taking the right step on this, is to get a vaccine. I think that's the first step in recovery here. When we get a vaccine, a lot of things are going to change, I believe. So I would put the emphasis on that vaccine, which I think Trump has done. More recently, I think that he should have declared a national policy in terms of some people may disagree with me on this, of masks and so forth, and of other types of things to combat. But he has stepped aside from that, and only recently did he even say that wearing a mask was a good idea. Before that, he was saying, no, you don't have to wear it. I think masks have made a big difference. They have helped those states up in the Northeast to control their viruses. And in fact, if you look at the European countries, they mandated masks nationwide, and they were able to control the COVID-19. I think that the government should have taken certain steps prior to what they're doing right now, but I think more they're in the right way. But in terms of getting workers back to work, I'm going to go back to what I said before. We got to start offering people alternative training right now, and we need to review the way in which our educational system is working, because you're going to have more and more unskilled workers, because people are not going to go to college. It's too expensive. They don't want to get into debt, and they don't see much benefit of it. And those unskilled workers are just going to keep holding down the wage.
Okay. All right. Well, it's now 7 o'clock. So I want to thank you very much, Rick, for your wonderful presentation and excellent answers to these questions. So thank you all very much for joining us this evening. Just an announcement, make sure to fill out the survey if you get a chance. It helps us to plan for the upcoming lecture series. I wanted to plug we're in the home stretch now of the series for this summer. Next Thursday, 5:30 to 7 p.m., same web address on Zoom. We're going to have the Honorable Greg Szal, who is a judge in Pima County. He's going to be presenting on some U.S. Supreme Court cases and giving us some updates about those. And then on August 6th, we'll have Mayor Coral Evans of the City of Flagstaff She'll be presenting with some of local experts on the local response to COVID-19. And then we will finish up the series on Thursday, August 13th, with one of my best friends who I went to grad school with, Dr. Glenn Smith of the University of North Georgia. He's going to talk about the role of intellectual humility in political hostility, which should be a very fascinating talk. So we thank you all very much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Rick, very much for your presentation.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, absolutely. And we will see you all next week, same time, same place. Stay safe and enjoy the rest of your summer. If I don't see all of you online again, enjoy your summer, and we'll see you next week for Judge Szal. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Rick.